Tonight I want to, I suppose, strike a little bit different note. I want to talk to you about a hidden and I think under-recognized war that's being waged against you. You have an enemy. And the Bible is very clear that we who follow Jesus have an enemy. Satan and his various powers of darkness hate the church of Jesus. They know that healthy churches are a mortal threat to their kingdom. That's why we love church planting. They know that the living church of Jesus is a testament against their lies that might makes right, and that there's no hope of a glorious future. And so they desire to destroy the church. And it's very simple. Strike the shepherd, scatter the flock, and then pick them off one by one and destroy them and their families. That's the enemy's plan. Now, I'm retired now. It's amazing how busy retirement is. And you do have a tendency when you retire of looking back. And I'm getting to do a lot of great things in this time. I'm having a blast. But part of the reason I get to do these things is because I'm one of the few left standing. Like the people I knew 30 years ago, 40 years ago, are mostly not here. Mostly not in the game. Mostly not doing anything about the powers of darkness. And I don't want to see that happen again. In my nearly 50 years of ministry, I've seen glorious things. I mean, I could tell you stuff that you wouldn't even believe was real. But I've also seen lots of good leaders taken out and destroyed and sidelined or limited. Lots of good leaders who gave up on their dreams because of the warfare that was waged against them. And here's the thing that really gets me. Most of the time, they didn't even realize that they were a target until it was too late. They didn't even fight back. I've coached church planners for most of my 50 years of ministry. And what they never seem to be ready for is the spiritual attack. You know, we got all kinds of books and talk and podcasts and, social media and all on and on and on about how to appeal to people, how to lead, how to be a cooler leader, what's in, what's not. But hardly anybody ever talks about the spiritual dimension and takes seriously the thing that's causing so much trouble and disappointment. You know, I've seen so many with the call attacked before they could even begin. Attacked in body and mind. And unless somebody recognized the attack and intervened, they often quit or self-destructed or never even got started. You know, I can remember one of our church planners, the guy sits down with me and finally says, yeah, I admit I'm being called to plant a church. A week later, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. Like, boom. You know, I believe probably nearly all of you have been attacked in the past Some of you are under serious and sustained attack right now. When I was pastoring, I was under near constant attack in one way or another, actually. The funny thing is when I handed the church off and I retired, like most of it went away. Meanwhile, Ted, who took over from me, guess what? But what Ted says is, but God gives grace. And that's true. That's true, right? You know, according to a recent Barna survey, 38% of current pastors have thought about quitting full-time ministry in the last year. The numbers are higher for pastors who are under 45 and higher for women. We've got to get serious about this fight and get better at it. And the scriptures are really clear about the threat and the dangers involved. I call your attention to Ephesians chapter 6. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Like, we need to say that like 10 more times. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly, that is the spiritual realms. Don't get mistaken about who you're struggling against. It can seem that our struggle is against certain people, but you'd be wrong. It can seem maybe even our struggle's against secular culture, but you'd be wrong. They're just the visible manifestations of the real struggle. The struggle is against the powers of darkness, not flesh and blood, he says, not flesh and blood, but spiritual powers of darkness. Now, I have to stop it right away here and just say, like, I'm not one of those guys that thinks everything that happens is caused by a demon. You know, like, if you fall on the ski slope and break your leg, it's not a demon of broken legs. Gravity is sufficient. And you all know somebody who, like, goes off that end of things, right? The devil gets credit for a lot of stuff he doesn't deserve to get credit for. All right. Well, we know those people. Nonetheless, the scripture is very clear. We are in a struggle, and it's against spiritual powers of darkness. And we need, he says, to be prepared so that we can stand, that is, not quit, in the face of the devil's schemes. Oh yeah, okay, this is why I numbered the pages. 1 Peter, chapter 5, verse 8 and 9. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kinds of sufferings. Now here's the things, folks. We have the means to win. We have the means. We don't need to be afraid. We have the means to win. We have the power to overcome. But it's not automatic. You actually have to use it. You have to be alert and ready to use your power to overcome at the right moments. You can't just be passive and think you're going to make it. It's not automatic. That's why it says be sober, be alert, keep your eyes open, watch out, because he's out there and he's after you. Now, I think it would be helpful to consider the devil's schemes. He attacks mainly in three areas. The first main area is he attacks us in our mind, in our thoughts. This is the primary place of attack most of the time. The simplest attack is to introduce lies and half-truths, something he specializes in. These become, lodged in our mind, and they get introduced to our mind again and again and again until they become obsessive. Generally, these are lies about our effectiveness, lies about whether we are truly called, lies about acceptance from other people. They don't really like you. Nobody wants you to be the pastor. Nobody's getting saved. What people will think, lies about our forgiveness. Remember that thing? You're not really forgiven. Lies about our qualifications. Can you recognize any of those things? They're meant to get you to quit. Mondays are the worst usually. There were like a couple thousand Mondays I wanted to quit. There's just one problem. I'm completely committed to the idea that I can't make a move without permission. And God never would give me permission. Until the very end. Finally, I got it, just before the pandemic. God loves some people more than others. Back in the 1980s, remember I was doing these conferences all around the world. And the way these things would work is that there would be like a giant leaders gathering, like we're doing here this week, except there would be like 3,000 or 4,000 people. And he would bring teams from different churches, so each church would bring like 15, 20 people who would go to be a part of the ministry team. And everybody paid their own way. We had to pay all our own way, our own expenses. And there'd be like, 10, 15, 20, 30 churches that would bring teams. So he'd end up with a ministry team of, 200, 300, 400 people. So when people say they traveled with Wimber, that does not mean they ever were in the same car. Like, you have to understand what the situation was. They were in the same room with about 5,000 other people. So anyway, he would do this. And so we were part of that. And the thing of it is that it very quickly became clear to us that every single trip, somebody would be mentally attacked. And the way it would go would be, they would start to feel like nobody's getting healed when I pray for them. The Holy Spirit's not doing anything through me. Nobody on my team actually likes me. I should never have come. And they go to the back corner and they're out of action. One vineyard pastor had that happen to him, and he became convinced John Wimber didn't like him and didn't want him on the trip because he hadn't said hi to him yet. and went back to the airport, got on a plane, and came back to the States and missed out of the whole thing. Completely robbed. So we got to where we would tell people when we're going on these trips, first of all, everybody has to recruit a prayer team to pray for you while you're gone. Second of all, if you find yourself start thinking these kinds of negative thoughts, you have to tell somebody. And if you tell somebody, we'll pray for it. And here's the interesting thing. If they would tell somebody and we band around them and pray against these negative thoughts, it would pop like popping a soap bubble. I mean, 5 minutes of prayer and it's gone. It's like, it's not hard to stop, but you have to use your weapons. And you can't do it if you don't tell somebody. That was the remedy. And you know what? That's how it was for me. I learned to recognize the mental attacks against me, and it was not infrequently that I'm calling one of the, my staff, my team, I'm under pretty intense mental attack today. Pray for me. And in about an hour or two, it would be gone, and I'd be fine. But it was a regular occurrence. Sometimes Satan attacks our mind in a way that causes us to feel we're having a mental breakdown, even to the point of feeling mentally confused, unable to think clearly. There was one point where a woman in our church had friends from another denomination that had been missionaries in South America, and they were brought back to Chicago. It looked like they were going to have to leave the field and leave ministry permanently because they were having a mental breakdown, is what they said. And she says, I just wondered if you could pray for them. Maybe something could happen if you would pray for them. And I said, okay. And then I said, are they feeling like this? And I started to describe some of these negative, confused thought things that I have come to know go with being spiritually attacked. And she said, yes. I said, yeah, bring them. We can fix this. So, these poor people, they were not from a background that had any acquaintance with dealing with demonic powers. And I said, let's pray. And so they wanted to join hands. And I said, no, I'm praying for you. So I had to explain to them how this is going to go. And then I started breaking the power of a curse that had been placed on them and commanding a spirit of confusion to leave them. And as I began to do that, the guy started to start physically act like he was being jerked off the ground, like up on tiptoes. Jerk, jerk, jerk. And then all of a sudden there's a pop. And he turned and I said, it's gone, it's completely gone. I said, yep, sure enough, it's gone. So then I asked him, well, what was going on in South America? It kind of got you into this. Well, he said this woman came and she was from this witches' coven and she got converted and we baptized her, and the other people in the witches' coven were pretty unhappy about that, so we think maybe they put a curse on us. Yep, I think maybe so. Which is not a big deal if you know what to do with it, if you use your weapons. Okay, so that's the thing. You have to use the weapons. Sometimes he attacks us through the twisting and deceitfulness of our own emotional reactions. He loves to take our injured pride and our disappointed expectations, our comparisons, and our competitiveness, and turn them into the bitter roots that will destroy our relationships, our leadership, and eventually our church. Beware, my friends. Beware of any sense of entitlement in this business. You're not entitled to be successful. We are only entitled to be obedient. That's the end. That's the beginning. Don't be entitled about you deserve anything. It's all mercy anyway, right? It's all mercy. But when we start to feel entitled, then we are an easy target for the enemy to introduce his bitter roots. Both James and the writer of Hebrews warn us about these bitter roots. Hebrews 12. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Have we not seen more than enough of this? How many people, Christians, believers, young people have been defiled, hurt, because of some leader's injured pride and the bitter roots that grew out of it? James 3:14. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. Okay, James makes it very clear that it's demonic. It's a demonic thing. You must protect your heart against the bitter roots. Because if you don't, that's an opening for the evil one to get in there. Look, you're not going to get your way every time. And the perfect Sunday is never coming. And it's always going to be like preaching to a parade. You don't like it, do you? But it's true. I hate it. But you know, after 45 years of trying, I just finally realized it's never happening any other way. You're not going to get your way every time. And there's always going to be somebody who has a bigger church, unless your last name is Cho. Or somebody who seems more popular. Or somebody who gets the position you were hoping for. And when that happens, you must be careful and vigilant not to let it become a bitter root. And I've seen it happen, bitter roots happen over and over in this movement. And it's caused a lot of damage to the Church of Jesus. Now, let me play a bit of the fool and tell you a little of my own story, something you might not know. About 12 years ago, some of you who've been around long enough will know that we were selecting a new national director. And the long and short of it was it came down to a choice between me and Phil Strout. And you have to be a little bit out of your mind to put yourself up for that job. But I had like this deep conviction. God said you should do so. And I had, 30, 40, 50 prophetic words along that line. I had all kinds of stuff, that made me be open to what I would not have been open to before. And it came down to it, and they chose Phil, not me. And the thing about it is that in the immediate aftermath, there were a couple of people that said some pretty unkind things as well, kind of adding insult to injury. And, there was a follow-up meeting right afterwards, and it was really painful to go to that meeting. Like, all these people, they didn't choose me, and, so forth. There's all those things, and it was very kind of confusing, actually, because we really thought we'd heard from God. And in fact, the Mumfords actually took a plane flight over to spend some time with us because they were just concerned about how we were doing and wanted to encourage us. But I realized that I'm like on knife edge here. Like, this could be something that sets me up well for the future or could destroy me here. You understand? There are these moments that come and you're like on knife edge. And I thought, I must close off any opening for the devil to get in this. So, number one, I determined that no one would ever hear a negative word from me about Phil. And no one has. And I determined that I would be his biggest supporter and best friend. And you know what? He figured that out after a little while. And he started to ask me for advice. And then he started asking me to do little jobs for him, like that he couldn't get to. Could you take care of this? Could you take care of that? And it was not long before I was so thankful he got picked and not me. He knows that. We've talked about it. Like, I was having a whole lot more fun than he was. I became thankful for the lot that came to me in the end. And what I want to say is, when you get to that knife edge, when the thing doesn't go your way, when you get disappointed, when you thought you heard and you didn't, here's the secret to avoid the bitter root. Humble yourself. It's one of our weapons. It's one of our weapons against the powers of darkness. The powers of darkness don't understand this at all. They don't know anything about the power of humble yourself. But I'm telling you, there's power there. I'm telling you, there's power there. Humble yourself. Pull that weapon out and use it. You want to become truly great? Humble yourself. Become a servant. Lay down all your rights. Lay down all your expectations. And become nothing but a servant. And God will bless. So be alert and watch out for the mental attacks. But that's not the only way he attacks. He also attacks us through other people. I'm going to call your attention to Matthew chapter 16. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. And Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. There is no person who cannot at a moment be overwhelmed with the deception of the evil one to the point where they speak his words. Here it was Peter. And Jesus recognized it instantly, that he wasn't dealing with Peter. He was dealing with the power of darkness. Now, I've seen this literally hundreds of times. I mean, hundreds. Just when the new church really gets some momentum and its survival seems assured, someone close to the visionary leader seems to get this deception which leads them to attack the integrity and the motivation of that leader and to spread it to others, this vile and subtle questioning of their character, their gifting, and their calling and fitness to lead. And that is the mentality and the words of the demonic. And it happens to nearly every one of our church planters at some point. Most often through their best friend. And many have been taken out by it. We almost lost one of our best, very gifted young pastors a few years ago, a guy named Joel, who's up in Virginia. Some of you might know Joel Lowry. His wife is on our national team. This is what he says. He says, a few years ago, our church was in an exciting time. We moved into a new building, and everything was growing and full of life. And then the unthinkable happened. Some of our best friends, people we had vacationed with, turned against us. We had to correct them in their behavior, and instead of repenting, they worked tirelessly to turn all our leaders against us. Our vineyard overseers came in and gathered all the leaders that they had spoken to, and we spent 4 hours listening to them attack my character, my ministry, my marriage, and my trustworthiness. They accused me of being mean, of not listening, of building my church on the backs of volunteers, of not caring for people, of being a bad husband, being abusive to my staff. As I sat and listened to twisting of truths, taking comments out of context, and projection of my evil intention, it felt like my soul was slowly shriveling and dying right there in my chair. To watch people that I had walked with so deeply turn on me was too much. And afterwards, I told God that if this is what I get for giving up my entire life to plant and pastor in church, then I want out. I'll go and make a bunch of money in the marketplace. And he did. But he couldn't get away. He'd go to a restaurant, and there'd be like a waitress come up to him and say, "You're supposed to be a pastor." It's really quite amazing how many prophets God has in restaurants. You know, and other kinds of, like, he couldn't get away from it. It was like person after person after person after person. You're supposed to be a pastor. You're supposed to be a pastor. He says, random people, even on holiday in other states, would approach me and affirm my calling as a pastor. And I was mad at God for doing it. But I eventually knew he was right, and I finally submitted and started pastoring again, and it has been some of the sweetest times of my life and my ministry. So what did I learn? I didn't have a healthy rhythm of Sabbath. I was tired, and the devil hit me when I was weak. But even in the ashes, God's grace is real and is sufficient for me. To pastors or leaders thinking about quitting, don't. Jesus builds his church. We're just stewards. Don't let stupid, broken people rob you of God's calling on your life. Like, it's happened to almost everybody I know. Like, you're forewarned. When it comes, it's not, you need to understand, like Jesus said, this is not your friend. This is the enemy. The enemy, if that doesn't work, likes to play the other side of the road. You know, every road has two ditches. There's a little Southern in me. Going way back, 3 generations. But sometimes these little sayings slip out. Anyway, I've also seen more established leaders, a lot of these are people I knew personally, give room to envy and bitterness because of the deceptive influence of a trusted friends or flattering prophecies saying that they were going to be great. You're going to be the next Billy Graham. And so on. I sat in a meeting back in 1990. It was a meeting that they were holding just before the rodeo in Denver. And the rodeo is always associated in my mind now with that. But there was one pastor who said in the meeting, well, I've gotten prophetic words that when John Wimber dies, I'm going to lead the Vineyard and then reunite the Vineyard and Calvary Chapel movements and had a whole new reunited movement. Everybody else in the room thought, over my dead body. Well, that didn't happen. But what it did do was alienate him from every other leader in the room. And over time, anger set into his heart because it wasn't happening. He blamed everybody else. That led him to become an abusive leader with his staff because he wasn't resolving his anger. And soon there was a great exodus from his team, and literally the guy destroyed his own church. Because he fell for the flattery of the evil one. Another kind of entitlement, you see, but just as deadly. They're both from the same place. What we need are leaders with a vision from God who will stay the course faithfully and reject the lies of the evil one, no matter who they come through. Never doubt the vision given you by God, and never doubt in the darkness what you've seen in the light. Never doubt in the darkness what you've seen in the light. And the enemy will send his minions to try to make you doubt, but don't buy it. Lastly, number 3, he attacks us in our bodies. Just this last April, I was in England at their national conference. And at one point in the meeting, I left to go to the bathroom, and I saw this woman sitting on the stairs out there looking really in pain, serious trouble. I couldn't walk by her without asking what's going on. She says, well, for the last number of years, I forget how many years she said, but it was a lot of years, I've had a migraine every day. And I don't know, something about the way she described it, I just thought, this is an attacking demon. This is not a body thing. This is a demonic thing. And I prayed for her and began to pray against the demon. And it started moving, which is always this dead giveaway when the pain starts moving. Well, long story short, I got a bunch of people. We spent a couple of hours tag teaming, praying for her, trying to help her get free of this demonic attack on her, on these headaches. And but I saw her again. I had another thing that was happening there in June. And she came up and she's like, I just want you to know that since that day, I haven't had another migraine. Now, here's the thing. She and her husband were just starting off in ministry. And the whole deal was, make this unbearable for her, and I can take out I can get them both. You do understand it's not just, it's like the whole family, right? So we need to be aware that there are demons that cause sickness. Not all sickness is caused by demons, but there are demons that cause sickness. And we need to be aware. We nearly lost, actually, one of our key leaders, Rose Sweatman, who was, until just this week, one of our regional overseers up in the Northwest. Back in 2016, she was having some difficulty breathing and was diagnosed with bronchitis. Turned out it was a misdiagnosis. Long story short, she goes through 2 months of, not getting better, trying different kinds of treatments, not getting better. Finally, they gave her an echocardiogram, which is a measurement of the heart, and it showed that her heart muscle was severely damaged. She had been having a heart attack for 2 months. And They said her entire upper and bottom left chambers looked like the heart of someone dying from alcoholism. And all her valves were leaking. And what should have been in a range of 55 to 75% in terms of something with her heart was only at 10%, and they couldn't believe she was actually still living. So they prescribed, like, you've got to get rid of the stress in your life. You have to stop everything. She says, I'd been through a year of complete stress through what was discerned by many as an assignment from evil. There had been a sustained attack against her leadership in some of the other ways that we've been talking about. And she had begun experiencing panic attacks as a result of the stress. And they think that that might have contributed to the heart problem. So when she finally left the hospital, she said her heart was at an efficiency rate of 20%. And they told her the best she could ever hope for was 25 to 30%, and that's if she rested and had no stress whatsoever. Well, in 2018, she went to our national conference. This was in Anaheim. It's the last one in Anaheim, I think. The last one in Anaheim. And this guy named Ken Fish prayed for her. He didn't know anything about her. She didn't know him. But she felt like the Lord said, go ask that guy to pray for you. So she went up to him. He only knew that she had been sick. He didn't know what. And she says, as he prayed for me, he began to touch a couple of places on my spine and said, oh, there it is, a spirit of death. You must go. And at that moment, she says, I doubled over and began to make a loud sound like groaning. In my head, I was thinking, I'm on the floor of our national conference getting deliverance. I so wanted to be free and healed that I just let my body and soul respond to how the Lord was touching me, and he did it a second time and identified a spirit of fear that had been haunting her. Got rid of both of them. 2 weeks later, she goes to get another echocardiogram, and to everybody's surprise, her heart efficiency was up to 55%, which is the low end of normal. That was a demonic attack, folks. And he will attack you, your spouse, and your kids. But it doesn't have to be. It happens when we don't use our weapons that we have available to us. When we pretend like nothing's going to happen. When we pretend like we think we're going to like lead churches and plant churches and like the devil's not going to fight back. Like, think again, like, you know, that's not how it works. So we've got to get serious about three things. Number one, we got to get more serious about intercession. For the last 10 years, God's been calling people into intercession, but where are the intercessory meetings? Like, you can't expand beyond the base of prayer, folks. You've heard it said you can't expand beyond the base of leaders. But the same is true of prayer. Like, you're trying to do stuff beyond what you have the prayer support for. And then you're getting beat up because you don't have the prayer support. You can't do it. You've got to get the prayer meetings going. Again, Ephesians 6:18. Pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Pray also for me that whenever I speak, words may be given so that I may fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel. If you will get these people praying, they will set up a prayer protection around you that will protect you from much of the attack of the evil one. But they have to be praying specifically, regularly, for you, your family, your ministry, for the church, for the well-being, for the freedom to minister. One of our early church plants, one of the very first ones was a near one. It was about an hour away. And the way we started was I would drive up on Sunday evenings to this place, and we'd do a Sunday evening meeting to gather people. And I was trying to help gather a bunch of people so that our youngish church planner, who was just getting out of seminary, could then take it from there and go. And the interesting thing is there was this road about halfway there called Half Day Road. And every single time we drove across Half Day Road heading north to this church plant, I got a headache. Like Sunday after Sunday. And I'd have a headache the whole time until we crossed Half Day Road coming home. And then the headache would be gone. Once more, I'm preaching the same sermon I preached on Sunday morning, and I get up there on Sunday night. And it's like the worst sermon you ever heard. Like our prayers are dribbling down our mouths. Nobody's getting healed. The worship is dead. It's sort of like, what are we doing here? Like, it's like we're slogging through mud. And finally, the light turned on. I realized, like we're encountering spiritual opposition. Like we need to get some prayer support here. So we sent off an email and got about 10, 15, 20 of our intercessor people. We knew we know who they are. If you don't give them something to do, they just act weird. So like you want to. You need to give them their proper outlet. So we got those people praying. Like they're like your secret army if you'll use them. So we got them praying. And it wasn't even 2 weeks. And we were up there. It had been like 2 weeks. They were praying for us for God to break this thing open. And we got to the end, and it was like another typical Sunday night. Just like, why are we here? This is not going anywhere. But we got to the end. We were kind of trying to do ministry time, and all of a sudden, we were meeting in this school, in this sort of teacher's lounge in the middle of the school. So we didn't have any windows in the room. The room had no windows. And all of a sudden, there's this overpowering smell of roses in the room. And our first thought was like, one of the women knocked her purse over and broke her perfume, So we're running around sniffing all the women in their purses. And we figured out, no, it's just in this one corner of the room and there's nobody there. And you could literally step in it and then step out. And I realized, well, that must be the presence of God. I said, anybody who's sick, get in that corner. We started putting... This is how church planting really works. We started putting people in that corner, and they were getting healed right and left, one after another. Like we hadn't had any healings. All of a sudden, and so we're just like going to it, praying for people one after another. Like, get another. Anybody else got anything wrong? This is your moment. Get in the corner. And one of the guys had gone out to his car to get something. He came back in and he says, "What's that smoke on the ceiling?" And we said, "What smoke?" And we looked up and there was like 2 feet of smoke on the ceiling of the room. The room was filled with the visible smoke that smelled not like smoke, but like roses, like the presence of the Lord. And I tell you, from that day on, no more headaches, no more resistance. We had complete freedom to establish that church. People got healed, the sermons, the worship, it all came together from that moment. It was like a breakthrough moment. The key was we got the intercessors in action. So, get them in action. One of my favorite stories is the story of the Moravians, who had an outpouring of the Spirit very much like the vineyard, only it was 300 years ago. And like the vineyard, there was a tremendous thing of worship that came on them. and also of, they were kingdom people, very kingdom oriented. They were the first people actually to send missionaries to the indigenous peoples in southeastern United States, in Georgia primarily, the Cherokee and the Chickasaw people who later were expelled to Oklahoma. What a lot of people don't realize is when they were on the Trail of Tears, they were singing hymns. Those people were believers when that happened to them because of the Moravians. Anyway, the Moravians started a prayer meeting that was 24 hours a day nonstop, that lasted for over 100 years, that sustained missionary outreach and work all over the world. Okay, like we need a prayer movement that will back up the kingdom ministry that we already see in front of us. Second, we've got to commit ourselves to connected transparency. The enemy thrives on isolated people. If you isolate yourself, you are inviting you to be taken out. Like in planting literal, I think Bubba told me, well, no, I think it was Doug before Bubba was in that position. We planted something like 750 churches over the 25 years we led Vineyard church planting. But in all that time, basically, we never saw a church planter who would get on the phone and ask advice from 3 or 4 people fail. And we almost never saw anyone succeed who didn't. The ones who isolated, I can do this myself, I don't need anybody's help, they are the ones that got taken out. Like, if you're gonna be in the vineyard, like, be in the vineyard. Like, do the thing. Like, call each other up, pray for each other, invite each other to speak at your churches. Sit in each other's living room, pray for each other, cry a little bit together. Maybe even laugh a little bit together. It's all allowed, but like, don't isolate. And when the mental battle gets tough, like, tell somebody. Because it's hard sometimes when you're under it to beat it all by yourself. But 5 minutes of prayer from your brother or your sister can pop it like a soap bubble. But you got to use it. So connected transparency. We've had enough of the sort of this other kind of stuff, right? Don't be alone. Lastly, we need a renewed experience of the power and authority that we have in the Spirit to deal with the warfare that we're in. It's interesting, the Apostle Paul says, our faith ultimately will not stand if it's founded only in human wisdom. It can only stand if it's founded on the power of God. The church is only built through the work of the Spirit, and so Jesus said, wait in Jerusalem, don't even try to do this until you've received power from on high. And I'll tell you that there were times, several significant times, where I received power from on high beyond anything I thought my body could take. And that has sustained me over the long haul. And I cannot imagine trying to lead in the 21st century without that. Without knowing that that the Holy Spirit's got you and you are filled with His power and you have something to give away. It's interesting that, it used to bug me that, Peter and John at the lame man said, such as we have, we give you. And I thought, how can they say that? Such as we have, we give you. Until it happened to me. And then I had something to give. And it was a whole different perspective. So we need that. And there's a lot of people, I'm telling you folks, there's a lot of people in our churches now who haven't seen that. Like, they weren't here with Wember. They weren't here even in the Toronto time. And it's been a long time since they've been understood what it means to be overwhelmed and carried away by the Spirit. And so we need to learn to pray once again, come Holy Spirit. And that's how I want to end tonight. So let's all stand. Can we get the spotlights down and the house lights up, please? Now, I'm hoping we get a little more light, but churches just aren't designed for ministry times anymore. Here's the thing I want to explain. The reason I'm asking for that is because the power of the Spirit, and if you are around any of us old guys, you'll get this sense from us. For us, the power of the Spirit's a very physical thing. It's very immediate. It's not a spiritual reality. It's a physical reality. And what we've come to understand is that when the Spirit starts moving, he moves physically on people's bodies. And there are side effects in the bodies because it's real power. They start getting hot and they turn color, or they start sweating, or they start trembling, or there are different things that happen that you can see with your physical eyes. Are you with me here? So that's why I want the light, so I can see your faces. Because if I can't see your faces, I can't tell where the Spirit's moving. And the whole game is to follow where he's moving. So during this ministry time, we're going to go on a journey together. Okay, it's going to start a certain way, and then we'll see where it goes. But we have to see where it goes in order to follow it. You understand what I mean? Now, another thing is leaders are notoriously terrible at receiving. So, a few ground rules. Number one, I don't want you to pray. This is not a time to pray. To pray is to work in a certain sense. This is not a time for you to pray. It says, be still and know that I am God. Okay, so I want you to be still and receive what God asks. Don't pray. Those, especially if you're from a Pentecostal background, this is hard to learn. But I'm telling you, don't pray right now. This is not the right time. This is the same reason we don't have the worship band, because that confuses the mode. All right, when we're worshiping, we're giving. But now we're to receive. So I want you to receive. The only prayer that's allowed right now is yes, Lord. That's always good. That prayer is always good, but nothing else. Yes, Lord. And we're going to wait when I invite the Spirit. There's all waiting is usually involved. And one of the things I find myself saying a lot in the vineyard is just we need to learn how to wait again. We don't wait enough. But we got plenty of time. It's not even 9 o'clock, so we got plenty of time to wait. Okay, let's see. Any other ground rules I want to get? When the Spirit comes, he does different things. Sometimes he comes to empower, and it's just that. It's like charging us up like a battery. There's no words. There's no instructions. There's no healing. It's just raw power. He's charging you up so that you'll have something to give away when it's your turn to pray for somebody else. Sometimes, though, he comes to heal physically or emotionally or spiritually. And so for some of you, there's that. Sometimes he comes to set people free, and he really loves freedom. He'll bypass almost everything else for freedom. Sometimes he comes to empower us in very specific ways, release or increase various kinds of gifts, like healing or prophecy or discernment or evangelism, those kinds of things. So there's a variety of ways in which he'll work in this time. And we have to be open to whatever he has for us at the time. Now, the way this is going to work, I'm going to invite the Spirit, and as I see him start moving, I'm going to start calling people out and asking people nearby to pray for them. By the time we get to the end of the evening, about half of you will be getting prayed for and half of you will be praying for them. Okay, so we all have to take our turns. Ready? Okay, Holy Spirit, we invite you to come and do your work here in us.